Hello.
Good evening.
We're now live on
Sorry,
YouTube.
am I not putting enough?
Hey, how are you?
It's the first time back.
Pay attention. Are we going to be on YouTube every time?
That is the plan, because there's a lot of folks, there were some folks who couldn't make it but wanted to partake.
Brilliant.
It's on our.
Are you taping this now? So is it being recorded?
It is recorded for posterity.
Oh, good. So someone else can tune in tomorrow. Very good.
Exactly, because we know
Very
some
good.
people had some competing commitments tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
And all three programs will,
That is the plan, yes.
okay.
Barring any unforeseen technical difficulties, we should be good for that.
Heidi, are you still online or are you offline?
I'm trying to see people and I can hear people. I have the note.
I see you're in the hospital. Are you okay?
Yeah, I had my hip replaced.
You had what replaced?
Hip,
My right hip. Just right here. Or get you.
he's hip.
This lady.
Oh, well, I always saw
Did
you
you
were.
put your video on, Heidi?
Hello.
Yeah, I'm trying to get
right
there.
Our faces.
Hello, all.
Rabbi Eric, how are you?
Hey, how
Hello,
are
Rabbi
you?
Eric.
See you.
Hello.
You didn't
Bye,
look like
Bob.
a rabbi before. You sure looks like one now.
Where is he?
To see you.
Where is he?
Oh.
Rabbi, great to see you.
How are you, man?
I'm doing great.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hey, Drew, how are you?
I'm wonderful.
Yes, I love
Better for seeing you.
Oh, thank you.
It's Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Santa Claus.
He looks great.
They call me Santa, and I have to.
Oh,
You do look
no. Oh.
You look great.
We all know there's no such thing as a Santa Claus.
That's right. There ain't no Santa Claus.
Here you have Hasidic? Rabbi,
What?
you sure you haven't gone to join the Hasidim?
No.
Okay.
My role model was always Rabbi Maurice Novoselic, and I'm just trying to look like him. That's
Oh,
Oh,
good
I
to
thought
see
it was
you.
your pandemic look.
well, that's true too. I haven't had a haircut in 6 months.
That's a very nice beard, Rabbi Eric.
Thank you very much. It's the only place I can grow my hair, so I do.
I have noticed that the bald men all have facial hair. It's amazing.
And they're all very sexy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
Some of us have had facial hair since long before we started going bald.
Well, that's true. But did you ever notice like those guys that shave their heads? They almost all grow beards.
Yes, my stepbrother-in-law has a really lovely beard and mustache and shaves his head every day.
Right. I go figure.
Yep.
I just don't want to shave anything ever. So
There you go.
I am truly a bum.
There's something to be said for that.
But you're our bum.
Nothing ever
Thank you.
changes.
Although I will tell you I will tell you one joke that I was captured recently by mimes.
Dory, are you joining us?
What?
Yes, I was captured by mimes, and it was terrible because they did unspeakable things to me.
Things have never changed.
Mr. Pun.
The only joke
got it.
I haven't changed it.
2 years to work on that joke?
Do I see somebody riding a spin bike?
Tonight.
Is your
No.
book, is the book all finished at the publisher?
I have 2 books that I've worked on, and neither one is at a publisher at the moment. They're both done, but first draft. But I have I'm working on editing and taking my time because of the pandemic and because of the political situation. Right? Nobody wants to hear at all what my theories and. I'll wait. I'll wait till when I talk about America as a racist nation, I won't be killed.
You need a proofreader?
Nation, like we didn't know that.
I know. Well, what can I? So, someone should tell me when I should start.
So our tradition has become to start at 5 past so that all the folks who had trouble getting on are in.
Rabbi, do you need a proofreader?
Is that Jewish Standard Time?
Yes, and I went to Brandeis, and actually all the classes started at 10 past the hour for that very reason.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you were always on Jewish Standard Time.
I read about it.
Why can't Jews learn to be on time?
JSC.
The holidays are never on time.
Why don't you shave?
That's true. They're either early or late. They're
You
never
should
on
be
time.
much
My
younger,
rabbi always
Rabbi.
taught me they come right on time.
Rabbi, holidays are
On
always right
the,
on
on the
time.
Jewish schedule, yes.
Right.
They're always right on the
If you were
specific.
late, they put you in detention after school.
Rabbi, I'm going to have to cut early because I'm going to tribute to Debbie.
Oh, very nice, very nice. My
It's
God,
gonna
as long
be-
as she
Sherry,
runs-
they're recording
They're
it.
recording it so you can
I
watch
know,
it
but
next Tuesday.
we're recording this too, aren't we?
How long has Debbie been? How long has Debbie gone?
It's
9 years.
10 years.
10 years.
It's
10
the
years.
10-year anniversary.
Wow.
It's amazing.
What can I say? How
Yeah, I
sad.
think it was my last year of rabbinical, or one of my last, near the end of my rabbinical school tenure that she passed.
I remember that day so well.
How sad.
We're
How sad.
recording this.
She was the folk singer.
Hi, Germans.
Saw her at Stepping
Well,
Stone.
Oh, yeah.
I thought we
Hi,
were.
Rabbi Wisnia.
Hello. Hello.
Nice to see you.
Hello,
This is Ellen Majesing. I'm the administrator.
Hello, Elena. Hello, Ellen. How are you?
I didn't call myself administrator. Ranjan set this up, so.
Screens.
A lot of people.
He's a good boy. How's he doing?
But that should make
It's
him
okay.
good.
Comfortable, Dan?
It's a lot of the usual suspects and then a lot of people.
Have you had
Lori
your
and
vaccine yet, Rabbi?
Hi,
I
Lori
just
and
got it
Seth.
today. Judy and I just got it today.
Today? I'm on 2 lists. I don't know. I'm waiting.
Keep checking your
a couple of
computers, all you can do. You have to sit on your computer 24/7 or you don't get in.
Well, it's, every state is different.
Who did that? That was Rabbi Blum who put my name there?
Yes,
Oh,
guilty
thank you.
charge.
Princeton Hospital, they call you.
I'm helping.
Except Rabbi Wisney's in Pennsylvania. He had to drive to Lancaster. Around the corner.
To get started, everyone, I just muted everyone just so we can hear our fabulous guest speaker. We're so excited to welcome back Rabbi Eric Wisnia to teaching us at Beth Chaim. So we're so looking forward to hearing him speak tonight and for the next 2 Thursdays about the history of ancient Israel. Rabbi Wisnia, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who makes us special with commandments and commands us to get smart. And so it is, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take you back to the thrilling days of yesteryear. Back to the days of Canaan. Now, we Jews, it's quite clear, if you read the first 11 chapters of Genesis, we consider ourselves to come out of the world of Babylonia, Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, between the Idiglat and the Nahar Frat. And this fertile part of the world was what began culture in the world. The other place where culture began was down on the Nile Delta. And so in the ancient world, there were essentially 2 major cultures. The culture from Mesopotamia, or Babylonia, as it was often called, and the culture of the Nile, which is Egypt. And this is because society grew as agriculture grew. Agriculture supposedly started around 5,000 years ago. And by about 2,000 years ago, Babylonia and Egypt had organized themselves into major societies and two major empires that would influence the world for the next 3,000 years. We Jews come out of the Mesopotamian world. Our language is a cognate of Babylonian or Mesopotamian. Our culture is Babylonian. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are the Jewish view of Babylonian cosmology. And so the Israel and the city of Ur that Abraham came out of, Ur is the Babylonian way of saying the Hebrew ear, which means city. So Abraham came from the city, which is, of course, what you'd expect. The New York boy came from Brooklyn and grew up as a good New Yorker in the Babylonian world. One of the commentators about this point of history refers to it as the Middle East strip mall. That's Robert Filer, and he calls it the Middle East strip mall. He says at the northern end of the strip mall, you have the Mesopotamian Babylonian anchor store. And at the bottom end of the strip mall, you have the Egyptian anchor store. And guess who was directly in the middle? Us. That's why we had such a verschlungene history, because we were exactly in the middle of the two big empires, the only empires in the world. In fact, the only thing worth owning was one of those two big anchor stores, because they had tons of food and therefore they had money and power. So the Mesopotamians were always trying to conquer Egypt. The Egyptians were always trying to conquer Mesopotamia. And the road, either way, came right through one of those little mom and pop stores known as the Jews. So it is not that we were so important. Oh, of course, you read our history, we think we're the most important thing in the world. Well, that's because geography is everything, and we had the worst geography imaginable, right in the middle of these two empires. It's clear that we are descendants of the Babylonian Mesopotamian Empire. However, if we come out of that, our language is Babylonian. We count like Babylonians. We count using 6s and 12s. Our calendar is based on the moon. In fact, the Jewish calendar is not the Jewish calendar. We just stole the Babylonian calendar. Most of our lives, we were looking towards Babylonia. However, Babylonia was not a secure anchor store. It was constantly changing management, changing between Hittites and Assyrians and Neo-Babylonians, and they were constantly in turmoil. And to tell you the truth, it was not reliable. Egypt, on the other hand, was extremely reliable. Every single year during the winter, it would rain and rain and rain in the center of Africa, and all that water would come pouring down the Nile. And the Nile would overflow its banks and fertilize the Nile Delta and all of Egypt. So Egypt always had bread. They always had corn. They had grain and food and money. So more and more, as we Jews who settled in the middle there, in what was called Canaan, we began to look towards Egypt. Now, Canaan is a kind of Babylonian word. The name of the place was probably Cananahu, and that comes from the idea, it says it's purple. It comes from the idea of purple, because on the coastline, there were snails, and these snails, if you grind them up, they made a wonderful purple dye. And so along the coastline of Canaan, they made this purple dye. It was very famous and brought in a lot of money. because it was the latest fashion, and the people used to like the Canaan fashions. So purple dye, or a Canaan dye, was very important. Now, later in time, the Canaanites, we were conquered by Alexander the Great, who and the Greeks would also refer to this entire land by that idea of the purple dye. In Babylonian, it was Kanaanhu. In Greek, the word phoenix means purple. And so they were called the Phoenix people, or Phoniki, and that's where Phoenicians come from. But they're the same people, the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, and later the Carthaginians. These are all Canaanites who spoke a cognate of Babylonian or Hebrew or Phoenician, used their alphabet. And in fact, most people don't realize that Carthage, which was the last Canaanite holdout, was not called Carthage, but actually in Canaan it's called Cartagena, the beautiful city. And the famous Carthaginian general, Hannibal, his name wasn't Hannibal, his name was Hannibal. Baal is gracious. All right, that's farther on, who cares? Let's go back to us, the center of the universe. There we are in Canaan. You know the story. Honest Abe leaves Babylonia, goes south, becomes a shepherd, a herdsman, wandering around Canaan. Abe has Isaac, Isaac has Jacob. You saw the show, Jacob in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Jake has 12 boys, each of whom becomes an eponymous leader of a tribe of Bedouins. So if we go down somewhere, let's say this whole series starts around 1800 BCE. That's the date that's often given to Abraham, 1800 before the Common Era. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that'll take us down maybe till about 1600 BCE. Canaan was a nice place. It was pasture land, it was grazing, gently rolling hills, lots of grain for lots of ground cover for your flocks. Except the problem was in the Middle East, unless you lived on one of the big anchor stores that had rivers, there would often be droughts. So that Canaan was subject to a lot of droughts. As I said, the Babylonian anchor store began to drift apart from Canaan, and so Canaan began to look towards Egypt more and more. The first real recorded history that we have comes from a group of letters that Canaanite kings, Canaan had little city-states on the Greek model, little city-states ruled by a little potentate who thought of himself as king and god. And each one of these little states, and there were about 20 of them throughout Canaan, they lived in their little towns. They didn't have much to do with one another. They paid nominal taxes to the Egyptian pharaoh, and they would get help whenever there was a famine. Whenever marauders came, the Egyptians would send up troops. So if we jump to the year 1350 BCE, we have a specific archaeological find. This was the set of letters that were dug up in Tel El Amarna in Egypt by a British archaeologist. And these were letters written by 6 different little kings who ruled Canaanite little city-states. And they were written to the Pharaoh of Egypt, whose name was very famous. He's Akhenaton. Akhenaton. He was the king, and in his capital of Amarna on the Nile Delta, he kept all their letters, and around 1960, they all got dug up, and we found them, and we could read them. And of course, they're written in the Canaanite, the Hebrew cognate of Babylonia, and they're written to the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaton. And we've read them, and they're really hysterical because these 6 Canaanite little petty kings are crybabies. In their letters to Pharaoh Akhenaton, they're kvetching about the other kings. And they're telling Akhenaton, you know, you like him better and give him more tax breaks, but I'm much more loyal, so you should do it for me. And why don't you stab that guy in the back, because he's been encroaching on my fields and he's no good. And if you read the Tel El Amarna letters, you get the impression that these Canaanite city-states were not organized, they didn't like each other, and they were all kind of run by crazy guys. The Jews were Bedouins living in Canaan. Our story is there was famine, and when there was famine in Canaan, where did you go? Down to Egypt. You remember the song? Do you remember the good days of Canaan? The summers were endlessly gold. The fields were a patchwork of clover. The winters were never too cold. We'd stroll down the boulevards together. The evenings were always divine. Now the fields are dead and bare. No joie de vivre anywhere. Et maintenant we drink a bitter wine. Those Canaan days we used to know. Where have they gone? Where did they go? Eh bien, raise your berets to those Canaan days. Famine hit Canaan. What did they do? They looked to Egypt. You know our story? Brother Joe was down in Egypt saving Egypt. So it seems that the Jews went down to Egypt. The Torah tells us they were in Egypt 400 years. Of course, the number 400 and the number 40 in biblical parlance don't seem to be actual numbers. It's not like they counted 399 years and then the next one was number 400. It seems that 40 in biblical Hebrew is a euphemism. It ain't my euphemism, it's a euphemism. And it means simply a lot. How long was Moses up on Mount Sinai talking to God? 40 days and 40 nights. How long did it rain on Noah? 40 days and 40 nights. 40 doesn't seem to be 39 plus 1. It means a lot. 400, a hell of a lot. We were slaves in Egypt. You know the story. God brought us out with a mighty fist and an outstretched arm and saved us from Egyptian slavery. The only problem with this is that we don't have any archaeology evidence for it. In Canaan, we had been Bedouin tribes. It's not clear what we did, what our life was like, whether we had a religion, whether we did much. If you look in the book of Genesis that talks about this, Abraham had a relationship with God, and he would make sacrifices now and then wherever he was. Isaac, Jacob, the boys, they believed in God. Okay. We don't know what they did. We don't know what their religion really was like. We know they were typical Western Amorite Bedouins. In fact, that's what the word Hebrew seems to mean. The Hebrew word for Hebrew is iri. That means wanderer, passer over, wanderer. So that we were Bedouins, we were Hebrews. Our story is we go down to Egypt approximately 1600 BCE, and Moses brings us out in 1250 BCE. On the 9th of April at 6 in the morning, it's rather clear when it happened. Now the question is, you'd think if we were slaves in Egypt and Joseph was so important, that there would be a lot of biblical and a lot of archaeological evidence for our being in Egypt. The reality is that there's almost none, nothing. In fact, it's a little strange. With when you think about it, that there is zero talking about the Jews in Egypt, because we know a lot about the Egyptians. The Egyptians were very chatty. If you study Egyptian archaeology, you will learn that the Egyptians talked about everybody and in great detail. They used to put up a monument to everything. In fact, they put up monuments to things that didn't happen. They liked to talk about it 24 hours a day on CNN, how great they were, how powerful they were, how terrible the other guy was. They were having little revolutions and they badmouth each other. One pharaoh would assassinate another and he'd change all the stories about him. We have lots of archaeology about Egypt, but we have almost zero about the Jews. This has led a number of archaeologists, particularly in the modern day, to hypothesize that the Jews were never slaves in Egypt. Very strange. How come we Jews talk about slavery in Egypt all the time, whereas the Egyptians never mention it? So, a number of times it's been written about in the Journal of Reform Judaism, and I've known some professors in my time who have tried, and even rabbis, who've tried to argue that, well, maybe this story about the Jews in Egypt is not true. I went to the University of Pennsylvania for undergraduate, class of 70, and I studied with one of the greatest archaeologists who ever lived. His name was James B. Pritchard. I studied with him because I had already been accepted to Hebrew Union College, and Nelson Glick told me, "You're at Penn and you didn't study with Pritchard?" I said, "No, I'm taking, Hebrew and Jewish stuff." He said, "I'm calling Pritchard, you'll take a class." So I sat in. I will read you a letter I wrote to a number of professors who don't like the Egypt theory. And I quote from myself. "We Jews should take Torah seriously. We do not have to take it literally. Hebrew demands interpretation, not slavish literalness. So someone should tell the Pesach deniers that they don't have to take all the plagues literally, but they should get a Seder. Now, granted that I am not a world-class archaeologist or even the son of an archaeologist, but I did take a year of archaeology of the Bible with Dr. James B. Pritchard at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia as an undergraduate back in the year 1969, 1970. And yes, I've also spent a night at a Motel 6 as well. Dr. Pritchard let me into his graduate ARC seminar because his old pal, Nelson Glick, told him that I was going to HUC next year and that he should do a favor. So there little Eric sat for a year, listening to his betters talk ARC. Thus it was in the spring of 1970 that Dr. P wished me a happy Pesach right in the middle of class. There and then I was shocked, but there ensued a discussion among the grad students. I sat there quietly, if you can imagine that, and they all talked about the historicity of Passover. Pritchard listened to them and was eloquent about the lack, and they were all eloquent about the lack of historical evidence for the Exodus or the Hapiru theory. And then Pritchard smiled and said something to the effect, hey, it was 50 years ago, and I am approaching senility. He said, "Boys, now we all know that the Egyptians are liars. Why would you expect them to tell you anything about the Israelites?" I raised my hand, and as all the graduate students sat there sagaciously, and I queried the good professor, "Dr. P, did you just call the Egyptians liars?" He then patiently and kindly launched into an explanation against the veracity of most Egyptian monarchs and told me that everybody and anybody who does Egyptology learns real pronto that number one, if the Egyptians can lie about you, they will. And number two, if they can't lie about you, they just don't talk about you and hope you go away and everyone forgets you. I asked him to elaborate, and he did. Number one, the Egyptians will lie about you if they can. There was a major battle towards the time we're talking about, happened at Kadesh in northern Canaan, and the battle occurred in 1274 BCE. And it was a brawl between our favorite pharaoh, Ramses II, and the Hittites under Mutawalli III. Personally, I can't believe there was a Mutawalli the first and second, but somebody named his kid Mutawalli III. Anyway, Ramses saved himself and his army and retreated back home, and then proceeded to set up monuments to his great crushing victory, even though he had just left the north to the Hittites, who promptly gobbled it up. No one was the wiser down in Egypt, because CNN was not embedded with his troops. Number two, if they can't get away with lying about you, the Egyptians won't talk about you and hope you just go away. Pritchard then told me the story of Akhenaten and Amenhotep IV. Amenhotep, again, I can't believe there was a 1, 2, and 3, but Amenhotep IV was assassinated around 1335 BCE, and which is germane to our story, because Amenhotep decided to be a henotheist. He tried to raise one Egyptian god, Ra, over all the others. You can imagine that this antagonized all the priesthoods in Egypt of the other temples to other Egyptian gods, and they managed to do away with Amenhotep and abolish his heresy. The Egyptian priests then obliterated his name from history as best they could. They did such a good job chiseling him off of every Stelaean monument they could find that in 1907, when the British archaeologist Flinders Petrie literally fell into his tomb, he uncovered the whole history about Akhenaten and Amenhotep, and everybody said, who? Because they had no idea. The Egyptians had obliterated him. So, given these two basically contemporary to the supposedly non-existent Passover story of Egyptian lying, Dr. Pritchard assured me that the Egyptian silence about our ancestors leaving the loving arms of Egypt was perfectly understandable. He asked, what do you think they would do, Wisnia? In view of type 1, they couldn't get away with telling people that you Jews were still slaves in Egypt when you'd all left. And they were unlikely to put up a sign on the shore of the Red Sea saying, here's where the Jews beat us. So they did Egyptian lie number 2, and they never talked about you again. After all, you did walk off into the desert and into oblivion, so they hoped. How were they to know that you Jews would write a bestseller that would later be made into a full-length feature blockbuster movie starring Charlton Heston? I don't remember if he really said that about Charlton Heston, but I do think about it. Pritchard did tell me to hold my Seder, tell the story, and to hold my head up high. And I remember his kind smile as he said that to me. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is absolutely no archaeological evidence for the Jews being in Egypt, except for the fact that the Jews believe it. Except for the fact that in every other cloth of the Torah, it talks about us as coming out of Egyptian slavery. Deuteronomy 17, Moses is so upset with our hankering after Egypt that he keeps telling us, don't go back. Forget Egypt. It was bad for you. Don't go back. what was our life like in Egypt? Well, the slavery part is not so clear. In fact, if you read what our life was like, we tell ourselves that there were 3 things that we Jews did in Egypt. Number 1 is we observed Shabbat. That seems to have been something the Jews did. Number 2, we continued to circumcise our boys. And number 3, we kept our names. Now we picked up Hebrew, some Egyptian names. Moshe, Asenat, these are Pinchas, these are Egyptian names. But Moshe ben Amram, we kept the idea that we were son of so-and-so, and we said it in Hebrew. So Moshe ben Amram was his name, even though Moshe is an Egyptian word. So we kept Shabbat, we kept circumcision, and we kept our names, our identity, our lineage. That seems to be what made a Jew in Egypt. Was there intermarriage? We assume there was. We assume that those who clung to the idea of Jewishness, whatever that meant, there were no holidays really, but Shabbat seemed to have been a big thing. And Shabbat, of course, was totally unknown to the Egyptians. The Egyptians, of course, did not count in 6s and 12s. That was a Mesopotamian thing. So they must have looked at this 6 work days and 1 day off as a very strange Jewish event. Nevertheless, we Jews were a collective people. When Moses brought us out in approximately the year 1250, he took us out and we went to Mount Sinai. Now, what happened on Mount Sinai? You saw the movie, you know the story. We met God, and Charlton Heston brought down the 10 Commandments, and that seems to be what made us into a people. The fact that we left Egypt as a unity, as 12 collective tribes under the leadership of Moshe. We went to Mount Sinai and bound ourselves to some degree of commandments, and then we wandered in the desert. That seems to be what made us Jews. Did we get the whole Torah in 1250 BCE? I doubt it. First of all, the Torah scroll that you and I know is not written in ancient Canaanite alphabet. It's written in the modern, what's called the Square Assyrian alphabet. That alphabet did not come up until the Assyrian Empire in 800 and 700 BCE. So prior to that, any writing that was done, all the archaeology has shown us that all the script that is used is the ancient Canaanite or ancient Phoenician. Remember, those are the same word. One is a Greek word and one is a Mesopotamian word. The ancient Canaanite Phoenician alphabet, which looks kind of like chicken scratch. Doesn't look like Hebrew. Hebrew looks very much like what the Square Assyrian alphabet was, later became. So the Torah is written in that Square Assyrian alphabet. It was not written down in the year 1250 when Moses supposedly got it. The Torah, you've heard it, you've read it, you know the story. We have holidays, we have 613 commandments, and that's what makes us Jews. What was it before that? Hard to tell you. We made sacrifices wherever they were. We had a relationship with Adonai. We observed Shabbat. We observed circumcision, and we didn't change our names. That seems to be what made a Jew. And we thought of ourselves as a people. So we're wandering in the desert, again, for, quote, 40 years. It doesn't mean 40, folks. You couldn't wander in that desert for 40 years if you tried. I was there. When I was in rabbinic school, we took truck rides The Israelis still controlled it all. We went into the Sinai. I was at what the Muslims call Mount Sinai. Of course, excuse me, what the Christians call Mount Sinai. The Muslims have two other mountains, one for the Sunni, one for the Shia, that they decided was Mount Sinai. And the Jews who were supposedly there, we were the ones who decided we weren't going to mark the place because the rabbis said Mount Sinai was an event. It was not a place. So therefore, we never went back. We never made pilgrimages to Mount Sinai. Only the Christians and the Muslims do that. The Jews saw it as an event and saw Torah as a living document. So we wander around the desert. Actually, if you look in the stories of Exodus and Numbers, there's really about 2 years worth of stories of what we actually did. We moved here, we stayed for a couple of months, we moved to that oasis, went a couple of months, and then we finally made it up to Kadesh Barnea, which is right on the border of Sinai, between south of Beersheba, kind of southeast of Beersheba, and it is a well. I have been there. It is a dinky nowhere. You could not have put 600,000 men around that well if you tried. They would have died. I don't believe the numbers. The numbers in Hebrew don't mean what you think they mean. So I can't tell you anything about numbers. All I can tell you is that we made it to Kadesh Barnea. And from there, we were going to go back to Canaan. Let me read to you from the biblical text. Numbers chapter 13. The Lord said to Moshe, send men from Kadesh to spy out the land of Canaan, which I will give to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, everyone a leader among them. So Moses sent from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord. And all of the men he sent were heads of the people of Israel. Then, of course, he gives you the names. The only ones we really care about are Caleb and Joshua. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan. And he said to them, go up into the Negev and go up into the hill country in Canaan and see what the land is, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or fortified, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there is wood in it or not. Be of good courage and bring back some fruit of the land. And the time was the season for the first grapes, so it was a little after Pesach. So they went out and spied out the land from the wilderness of Tzin to Rehov, near the entrance of Hamat, way up in the north by Hermon. They went up into the Negev and they came to Hebron. And it tells you something about Hebron. They went into the valley of Eshcol. Anyway, at the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of Israel, spread out in Paran by Kadesh Barnea. And they brought back word. And they showed them the fruit of the land. And they said, we came to the land which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey. Canaan, when it was raining, when the rains came, it was fertile. And there is fruit. Yet the people who dwell in the land are strong, and their city-states are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. That's a Hebrew euphemism for giants. The people are giants who live there. The Amalekites dwell in the land, and the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites. It's terrible. But Caleb quieted the people, and he said, no, let us go up at once and occupy the land, for we are well able to overcome it. Caleb and Joshua argued that we should go attack Canaan. Then the men who had gone up with them said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel an evil report about the land, which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people who saw in it are men of great stature. And we saw giants, the son of Anak, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. You know the story. We didn't go into Canaan. We did not attack the city-states. In fact, the Torah tells us we wandered for another 38 years. If you read the stories, what we did was take a right-hand turn. Rather than go up into Canaan to take over the Canaanite city-states, we went to the right. We crossed underneath the Dead Sea, and we went up the right-hand side of the Jordan. There's a lot of water that flows from those mountains into the Jordan and into the Dead Sea. And so it seems that we chose the easy path. We started in Edom, we went to Moab, we went to Ammon, and we went up the right-hand side, all the while fighting with the little Canaanite tribes until we reached the top of the Dead Sea near Jericho. There we had a smackdown with the Canaanites who lived in that area north of it in Syria. That was the land of Bashan. And so on the right-hand side of the Jordan, we conquered all of that area slowly, moving up. What was our life like? Well, we had the Torah, supposedly. We can assume that we did what we did in Egypt. Shabbat was still observed. The circumcision was still observed. And the Hebrew language was used and the names were still used. So this made us an identifiable group. We had a relationship to our God. But the Canaanites were our first cousins. They spoke the same language as we did. They had very similar language and customs as we did. The difference was that we worshiped God, our God, Yahweh. We'll call him Adonai because we don't want to say Yahweh. Whereas the Canaanites had their own little deities, little Baals. They had a Chemosh and they had Molech and they had all these little local gods. Each one of the Canaanite tribes had their own god. Each Canaanite city-state had its own god. And there we were poised after, let's say, the year 1210 BCE, ready to move across the Jordan back over to the left by the city of Jericho. Moses died. And that was the end of chapter 1 of our story. Now, can we unmute in case we have any questions up to this point?
I have a question, Rabbi. Steve.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, you mentioned around 1,800 as Abraham.
Yeah.
Yes. So where does this 5,000, when we have the new year? Well, what happened in the other 3,200 years?
All right. That goes back. This is the year 5780, right?
You say so.
5781. Excuse me. I lost a year. It's been COVID is crazy, but you know what they say: 2020 is hindsight. So the counting of the years is a modern thing. First of all, in the ancient Babylonian world, they counted from They counted from the year of the king. For instance, we would say I was born in the 5th year of King Shupaluli-Umash. Of course, if you didn't know who Shupaluli-Umash was, it didn't much matter, did it? And that was the problem, that all the kings had their own year, and every time a new king would come, they'd have a new year, and it got to be really pandemonium. Finally, what happened is Alexander the Great conquered the whole Verschlungene world around the year 333 BCE. You remember Alexander? His parents were Mr. and Mrs. Great. They named his middle name the Alexander the Great. Alex died.
330 BCE.
Yeah, BCE. Alex dies. Let's round it off. Let's say 333. I like that number. I can remember it. It's good enough. Alex dies in 333 BCE, and Alex had conquered the whole Verschlungene world. He destroyed the Persian Empire. He conquered Egypt. He conquered the whole shebang. Everybody. So that everybody started counting from the day Alexander died. That became the year 1. And everything was after the death of Alexander. And that worked well because everybody knew who Alex was. Everybody knew when he died. And so everything was before Alexander or after the death of Alexander. And that's how things of Alexander. Until you had the Roman Empire. The Romans take over from the Greeks, and the Romans, they don't want to count that way. What happened actually is the major event was that the Roman Emperor Constantine, his mother, whose name was Queen Helena, she was the queen mother of the Roman Empire. She became a holy roller, and she apparently had some visions. And one of her visions was that this dead Jewish rabbi, Yeshua Bar Yosef, appeared to her and said, I am the Messiah of the whole Verschlungene world, and I'm going to come save you and take care of you. Well, Helena ran around telling everybody she had this vision, and she is the woman, since her son was Emperor of Rome, she said, Connie, I want you should start worshiping Jesus. And Constantine, he said to her, Ma, do I have to? In Latin, he said this, or Greek, we're not sure. He spoke both. So his mother said, come on, I want you to. I really believe this stuff. So what happened? Connie says, hey, Ma, I'm going to use your boy Jesus, this dead Jew, and I'm going to un-Jewish him, but I'm going to become head of the church. I am going to mix religion and politics. And so around the year 300 of the Common Era, 300 CE, about 1700 years ago, Constantine said, hey, my mother became a Christian. We're all becoming Christian. And guess who's now in charge of the whole Christian religion? Me. So, Ma, what year did you say this Jew boy was born? And so she figured out when she thought Jesus was born. And she said, the year 0. So Connie says, all right, that's the year 0. There was no year 0. That was year 1. And we call it 1 AD, Anno Domini, in the year that Jesus, our Lord, was born. Anno Domini, our Lord, our ruler, our dominator. So Constantine said, we're counting from his birthday. The Jews said, oy vey, it's not bad enough. They killed him, they crucified him, they worship him, and now they're making us count from his birthday. You know, Jews don't count from anybody's birthday, not even mine. So the Jews decided, well, what are we going to count from? Rabbi Hillel II, Rabbi Hillel, the great-grandson of some other Hillel, he decided, I'm going to count and figure out when God made the world. So he counted back in the Torah to when God made the world. And according to his calculations, that was the year 1. And according to Rabbi Hillel II's calculations, this is the year 5,781 since God made the world. Now, if we were to bring Hillel here today and say, because, you know, he spoke English, hey, Hillel, come on. How accurate do you think you are? He'd say, hey, I'm guessing here, you know, so-and-so begat so-and-so. I gave him 20 years to beget. What's clear is I'm not counting from Jesus's birthday. Got it? We're counting from when God made the world, because God making the world was the best thing that ever happened. So according to our calculation, it's 5,781. Now, Helena, we know, actually made a mistake. Helena was off by 4 years. And if you look up in the Catholic Encyclopedia, the article under Jesus, it says that Jesus was born in the year 4 BC, which means before Christ, which is pretty funny if you think about it. So the Catholics admit that, well, Helena was wrong, but we're not going to change it. So we're still pretending this is 2021 AD when it isn't. It's actually 2025 AD. The Jews, Hillel also, he kind of guessed. Now, if you would have asked him how accurate he would have said, I tried to be accurate. We now know today, because Stephen Hawking's counted, that the world was created 13.5 billion years ago. So as I often tell people, this is the year 13.5 billion, 5,781 since God made it.
Right.
So if that makes you feel better, you know, then it's a number that we use to count from. And we Jews count from that number because we did not want to count from Jesus's birthday. So, and that was all because it's all rabbinic. All rabbinic. Yes.
Rabbi?
Yes.
The idea of the Khazars, that there was a Semitic rulers of Egypt for a while, and that's when the Jews came into Egypt. You buy that?
Well, I would recommend to you all, if you really want to read more about this, can you see this book?
Yes.
It's called Who Were the Early Israelites and Where Did They Come From? This is by Dr. William G. Deaver, an archaeology professor who taught it at HUC for a while. And it's one of the best popular books that talks about the ancient Israelite people and what their religion was like, what their life was like. Next week, when I talk to you about what happens when we move into the land, and that's when we become the Jewish people. Prior to that, when we were just running around the desert and in Egypt, we were a bunch of crazy Bedouins. We were shepherds. We were herdsmen. We were tribes. It's not even clear what we were. What was your specific question to me?
The relationship of the Khazars to the
there are a number of people, it's clear the Egyptians talk about the Bedouins from Canaan coming into Egypt all the time whenever there was a famine to buy food. The Egyptians talk about that all the time. Now, they don't mention Israel and they don't mention the Jews. The first real mention the Egyptians have of Jews, of Israel, they use the word Israel actually, is in a stele by Pharaoh Merneptah in the year 1210 BCE. Merneptah put up a stele. That's one of those big stones, and it was, you know, his newspaper on the stone. And he said, man, I whooped those Canaanites and those Israelites, and I beat them, and I did everything, you know, I'm really great. And we found that stele, and it actually says Canaan and Yisrael. And that was put up by Pharaoh Merneptah in the year 1210. That's the first kind of archaeological mention we have about Israel. It's not clear what we called ourselves. On one hand, we called ourselves Hebrews. Hebrew seems to be the Canaanite word Ivrim, Bedouins. And we were a tribe of Bedouins. You know, if you watch Lawrence of Arabia on TV, on the movies, you'll see Lawrence talks about you Arabs. And Prince Faisal says to him, well, wait, I know the Beni Salam, the Beni Hati, the Beni Sakr, the Beni this. I don't know this Arab tribe. We referred to ourselves as the Bnei Yisrael. That's what we called ourselves, the Bnei Yisrael. But we were Bedouins. So the Egyptians, I don't know what they called us. I don't know. And then again, don't forget, the Egyptians don't want to talk about us. We disgraced them. We ran away. So therefore, there's a number of archaeological evidences for Western Canaanites coming into Egypt. There's even one pharaoh, yes, who was a Canaanite. But it was clear from the Tel El Amarna letters that Egypt saw Canaan as its province. And that even though the Canaanites, most of their customs were Mesopotamian, for many hundred years, they found themselves under control of Egypt. And the Hyksos, there's a theory that the Hyksos are Canaanites, or that's Joseph. Who knows? You're not going to get a clear story because the Egyptians are liars. You can't trust anything they say. That's what Pritchard taught me in a year of archaeology. He said the Jews are much more reliable. He cinched his argument with one of his students when they said, well, how sure we can trust the Jews? He said two things. Number one, he said, what kind of people makes up a story of their origins that they were nobody schmagegi slaves to everybody else? He says, you show me every story of origin of a Middle Eastern people, and they all directly come from the sun god or the moon god or the Tiamat, the giant dragon, and they conquered him and they were the greatest and the biggest and the best. He said, the Jews, what's their story? We were schmendricks and slaves. We were nothing. And God brought us out. He said, who invents a story like that? And again, he turned to me and said, only you Jews. and the other thing was, I'm trying to think the second thing that he said was, oh yes, that.
About the bones, no pig bones?
Yeah, well, that I'll get to next week, but that's
Okay.
That's a very important thing. We don't know what it was in Egypt. In other words, it doesn't say that when we talk about it, when the early rabbis talk about it, they don't say we kept kosher. They say Shabbat, circumcision, and we didn't change our names. Now, it's clear once we get to Canaan, and this is one of the reasons why Dr. Deaver in that book that I'll show you next week swears that we got archaeological proof for the Jews in Canaan starting in 1200. It's quite clear that we existed in Canaan in the year 1200. And one of the ways he does that is pig bones.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So we leave Egypt, we go back to Canaan, walk around it for a while, and then we start just attacking all these little towns that didn't do anything to us.
Didn't attack.
Oh, the bleeding heart liberal.
Absolutely.
Oh, you mean just because, you know, I'll tell you, you know, when King David, when he wrote the 23rd Psalm, you know what he really wrote? He didn't say, yea, when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil because the Lord is with me. No, that's how we edited it. Yeah. He really wrote, yea, though
I'm the meanest son of a bitch in the whole
That's
valley.
Exactly what he wrote. He said, yea, when I walk through the valley, I shall fear no evil, for I'm the meanest son of a bitch in the valley. And that's essentially what we were. We decided that Canaan was ours, and we were coming back to take it. It had been ours, and it is ours, and we're going to take it. Now, what was our justification? Oh, God gave it to us.
Oh,
Now,
not a proud moment.
don't feel too terrible for the Canaanites. They were pretty nasty too. But in essence, you're totally correct. We moved in. Did we try and live peaceably with them? I think more and more the story of us just moving in and conquering them is not so true. And we'll talk about that next week, what we did in Canaan. Because if you look at the book of Judges, each one of the 12 stories in the book of Judges, one for each tribe, in case you couldn't guess, makes it very clear. The beginning of the story is we moved into Israel, or into Canaan. We settled in the fertile valleys. The Canaanite cities were up on top of the hills. And we kind of tried to live with each other. It didn't work out too well, and we totally started to assimilate. So we had conflict, and we wiped out the Canaanites. And the 12 stories make it very clear. We killed every single Canaanite. Not one was left alive. Every dog, every cat, every person. We wiped them out in the entire country. And then comes the next story, in which we lived outside of Canaanite cities, and we were the shepherds on the outside, and they were the city dwellers inside. And we tried to get along, and that didn't work too well. So we killed them all again. It's pretty clear to me we never wiped them out. In fact, we are the Canaanites. Don't forget, they were our first cousins. Their culture was very similar. One of the major differences, though, was religion, and we'll talk about that next week. So is there a justification for going into Canaan? Well, I'll tell you the story for one of the story of Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And a young Indian boy is taken by white people and raised and sent to medical school, becomes a great doctor, and decides to go back to his native land of native Indians and to help his old people. Mm-hmm. So he comes and he moves back, and the old chief, is angry at him. He says, "You become a white man. You use the white man's medicine. Use the white man's this, the white man's that." And he says, "Our ways are stupid." He said, "You put your babies out and they die." He says, "I inoculate them and they live." He said, get off it, old man." And he says, "Oh, so you've joined our enemies, the white man, who took our land and destroyed us." And he said, "Wait a minute. I remember you telling me 200 years ago, we moved in and wiped out the other tribe that used to live here. And we took their land because we wanted it." And the old chief says to him,
History is replete with that kind of story.
"Yes, I am not justifying our taking the land of Canaan. All I can tell you is we took it."
Rabbi, may I comment? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Our question, you say that within Egypt, there's no record because there was all. How about with the Hittites or the Assyrians or the people that lived in Jericho? Did they leave any records that specifically mention us from that time?
There is nothing until 1200 BCE. 1200 BCE. Again, I'm rounding, okay, but it's much more accurate than, I would say 50 years either way. So let's use the number 1200 BCE. We have the Merneptah stele, Pharaoh Merneptah, on a raid up into Canaan, he mentions Israel. He mentions the word. That's the first time I hear the word. If you look at the Hittites, the Canaanites, I'm not sure that the Egyptians looked at us as different than Canaanites. In other words, let me, if I if some Martians were to come down or were to meet you somewhere, and they would say, you don't look like a Martian. Where are you from, kid? And you'd say, third rock from the sun. You wouldn't say Princeton Junction, New Jersey, because the odds that they would know Princeton Junction, New Jersey is 0. And the fact that they know third rock from the sun it probably is more likely. So when we refer to ourselves, and when Abraham himself talks to Pharaoh, he says to him, I'm a Hebrew, I'm a Bedouin. You know, he doesn't say, oh, I'm a Jew. I'm one of those Bedouin, those Canaanite Bedouins that you see running around. There are lots of them. They get mentioned a lot. The Egyptians talk about them all the time. These Bedouins coming in off the desert. But they don't say the Beni Yisrael. They also don't mention any other tribe. They don't say the Beni Salom, the Beni Sakir. To them, we were all a bunch of crazy, you know, it's like when you say Arabs. You know, yes.
Rabbi, just an interesting question, though. Okay, so I get the fact that the Egyptians kind of wrote us out of their history with good reason, right? We embarrassed them. But all the other tribes in and around Canaan and the rest of the known world in that region, I would have thought would have had their own histories of, oh, how the Egyptians got embarrassed by this group of Bedouins that came in, were enslaved there, and defeated Egypt or earned their freedom and left the land of Egypt. But you don't hear about other people telling our story.
No, that's because by and large, the other people were either wiped out by us in many cases. They didn't leave a bestseller. You know, I mean, don't forget, we left the bestseller.
Kind of
our records became the international hit. You know, we have, if you want to read archaeological stuff, we have lots of stuff. King Mesha of Moab. Mesha of Moab, he talks about Israel. You know, I went to war with them, I had a fight with this Jew king. Mm-hmm. He doesn't say that, you know. I had a fight with this king and I beat Israel and I took this city. And then they all ganged up on me, you know. So we do find that, but not until after 1200.
Right.
Not until after 1200. Prior to that, I don't know how many Jews were slaves in Egypt. All right, if you read the Torah, it says 600,000 men came out of Egypt. 12 tribes. It doesn't actually say 600,000 men. It says 600 elephs came out. Now, how many men is an eleph? Well, in Canaanite Hebrew, eleph means 1,000.
But I don't believe that.
Well, you know, right. But as
it's too much, too many people.
Right. It would make the population
if it's 600,000 men, that means 2.5 million people.
Yeah.
You could, and I'm telling you, at Kadesh Barnea, I've been there. I've been in the Negev, in the Sinai. I was there. I saw it. You could put 2.5 million people in the Sinai. You'd reach one end to the other. Yeah. I mean,
Rabbi,
you can't get lost. You'd see it.
Rabbi, the Romans did a census around 100 AD. I think they figured Middle East had about 13 million populations. In fact, when Rome was the 500 AD, they were perhaps 1 million people total. So to think that the Jews had this much it's not possible.
A little
no, but you see, the question is, what do the numbers really mean? As I'm telling you that the number 40 just means it's a euphemism that means a lot. The fact that there were 600 elephs, first of all, once I hear the number 600, I say, that's the Jewish round number, 6 and 12. So I can't believe that's literal. And then there were, how many's in an eleph? I don't know. It's a unit. If there were 10 men in a unit, they called it an eleph. Whether 10,000, they called it, you know, I don't know what these words mean to. It's like the Hebrew word day. You know, the Hebrew word for day is yom. but that don't mean what you think it means. When does a Jewish Yom start? At moon up. Right? It starts at moon up and goes till moon up. So when we talk about a day in the Bible, we don't mean 24 hours from 12 midnight to 12 midnight. And not only that, how long is a year? Not 365 days. It's a little less, except sometimes it's a little more. And one of my professors said, and what if the word Shana doesn't mean year, but means a season? Because in the ancient world, there were two seasons, wet and dry. And when it was dry, it never rained. When it was wet, it was wet. So therefore, maybe the word Shana in the Torah really only refers to a season. So when Sarah gave birth at age 90, maybe she was only 45, which still would be miraculous, but not like 90, right? When Abraham was 52, when he went out, maybe he was 27. In other words, I don't know what they meant by their number. I know what they meant by the word day. It was not what I mean. So I have to realize that, as I've said, we can't take Torah literally. We take it figuratively. We have to say, what does it mean? If you look at our justification, we went down to Egypt for food. The Egyptians dealt ill with us. Did they? One of my biblical professors said, if you look at it, we lived in the land of Goshen, which was in the Nile Delta, the most fertile land in Egypt. He said, if they really were trying to be miserable, would they have given you the best farmland in Egypt? He said, and what did you have to do, you slaves? He says, you had to make bricks for Pharaoh. Yeah, do you realize everybody in Egypt, that's how you paid your taxes? You gave straw, and if not just straw, because that was what you from chopped in the fields after you had done it, what you couldn't eat. You then, with mud, mixed it into bricks. That's how you paid your taxes. You gave 2 months worth of corvée labor to Pharaoh. Yeah, except we, the boys from the desert, we don't work for nobody. We saw that as slavery. And so my professor, Dr. Brichto, said, maybe we weren't actually slaves. We thought we were slaves. We didn't like it. We couldn't wait to get out of Egypt. But maybe it wasn't as, he said, I don't know. All I can tell you is this. If you read our Torah, we Israelites are Mesopotamians who become a people in Canaan. Because of famine, we go down to Egypt. There we become populous. We become to 12 tribes. And we come out of Egypt and we go back to Canaan. And when we walk into Canaan this time, we are Jews. And I'll talk about next week what that means. Prior to this, I can't guarantee anything. What I have is very sparse. What gave us the right to go into Canaan? Nobody gave us the right. The fact is, we needed a land. We were coming out. If you read the stories of the Torah, we tried to get along with the Canaanites in Edom, Moab, and Ammon. We tried to get along with them. They were not peaceable people. And to tell you the truth, neither were we. It was a tough world.
And basically, it's a fairly small plot of land. I mean, really, the amount of land we were all trying to inhabit together, very tight.
And it didn't work well living together. Differences. We tried. If you read about it, we tried making deals with them. We said to the Amalekites, we're just passing through, don't attack us. You know, there's no reason for us to fight. We're not going to take your land. We're just passing it. And the Amalekites said, tough, we're attacking you anyway. We don't trust you. Plus the fact, if you're weak, we'll just conquer you and take everything you have. So
Rabbi,
what do you do with that? Yeah.
Rabbi, you said there was a possibility of intermarriage. Then there is the possibility of bioarchaeology, that there should be Jewish DNA in Egyptians and Egyptian DNAs in Jews, and we can do actually do timing and know about the approximate time that DNA arose. Has anyone done that?
I'm not sure.
Well, I can make a comment on that. Yeah, the guy, Bennett Greenspan, who's the head of Family Tree DNA, has done an analysis of the Jews and also people currently living in the Middle East, the Palestinians and so forth. And the DNA is very, very close.
Yeah, we are the Canaanites.
Much closer than Jews in Europe, for example.
Oh yeah.
So,
well, the
yeah.
Ashkenazim, you know, I subscribe to the fact that the Ashkenazim were not Jews. That those are all the crazy Khazars who converted. And
except for one thing, I had a DNA test, which Gary loves to talk about, where my mitochondrial something or other is only 6% possibility. What is that? What is that, Gary?
Actually, Leslie, the maternal DNA from the direct female line, you are part of the Middle East.
Yeah.
Only about 6 or 8% of Ashkenazis, I think, would have that. But you are from the Middle East.
And yet I'm 98% Ashkenazi.
Oh, you may think you're 98% Ashkenazi.
No, she's.
But if you have Middle East DNA.
Yeah, I have Middle East DNA also.
The direct maternal line from Leslie is the direct maternal line. I have actually Maguire is my ancestry, not Fox, from Ireland. Leslie is from the Middle East DNA.
Not me, baby. Warsaw and Lodz. Warsaw, Vilna and Lodz. 100% Polak. And I'm telling you, I'm not proud of it. Okay, 100% Polak. There ain't no, the way I am a direct descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is because I was adopted.
The amazing thing is that we're here. I mean, after all the generations that preceded us, we survived each time to have a child that got to adulthood and reproduced. It's just amazing.
And don't forget, intermarriage is a strange thing because it's a rather bland statement. Let me tell you what I mean by that. What I mean by that is, you ladies, you know, let's face it, you're just baby machines. You don't count. You put the sperm in, you take out the kid, thank you, ma'am. We don't count women. Women, you're lucky we counted you as human. I mean, that's better than the Babylonians. The Babylonians thought you were below the animals. At least we said women have rights, but don't think for 1 minute that we treated you as equal. We did not. In fact, it didn't matter. Most of the time, you'd find a woman from some tribe and marry her. She's your possession. She moves into your house, into your mother. Really what happened is she moved into your mother's tent. Bedouins, that's the way they work. The man's mother, she runs everything.
But yet, in our story, our national myths of our Torah, we make a big deal about finding the right woman. It's not just a casual thing. So it's a rather different line, different story.
All right, you women do count, you know. Yes, I suppose it does matter, Leslie, who the mother is. But to tell you,
in other words, just talking about it, actually, apparently it was somewhat important in the writing of the story. It wasn't just,
Sure. Look, every man is, you know, he no matter what he thinks about his wife, his mother's, you know, a saint, and certainly his mother.
You never met my mother. Rabbi, if I could just interject, you were talking about the Ashkenazi Jews and your theory. I believe it was you who gave me a book to read called The 13th Tribe.
Yes. Arthur Kessler, the mathematician, he wrote a book after World War II and did a lot of research, and in which he checked the tribe of the Khazars. The Khazars were a Caucasian tribe of Mongols, right? The Mongols are Oriental. These were Caucasians, but they lived like Mongols. And they're from the Caucasus region, and their name was Khazar. And it seems that both the Muslims and the Byzantines write about them historically, not very flatteringly. Both sides hated them. The Khazars seem to have been a rather nasty group who really roused the antagonism of Byzantium, the Christians, and of the Caliph of Baghdad. Occasionally in the Talmud, they talk about, and it seems that they all converted to Judaism sometime around 800 or 900 of the Common Era. It's not clear, it's not provable, because
right, because somebody came up with one or two stories, maybe about 10 years ago in the Times, where someone really refutes that whole concept.
Yeah,
Whatever.
except the fact that both the Byzantines and the Muslims and the Christians who were contemporary both tell the story, and those two did not collaborate. They hated each other, and they also hated the Khazars. So you have a lot of literary history. You have zero archaeology because, first of all, the Russians went out of their way after World War I to obliterate any sign the Khazars ever existed. And so there's zero archaeology, aside from the fact that the Khazars were Bedouins. They were like Mongols. They had their flocks. Their houses were yurts, tents on wagons, and they just followed. So there were no cities. They didn't write anything. What kind of Jews were they? Well, Yehuda Halevi says, oh my God, poor Rabbi Chastai. He went to these crazy Jews over there. We never heard from them again. Oy vey.
They were Jews with wheels.
Right.
There's also the argument that given the number of Jews who left Israel or wherever it was when the diaspora, where did these 6 million people come from?
Well, that's why that was the argument for the Khazars. That's what Arthur Kessler wrote, that, when Poland is formed, let's say around 1400, when Poland is formed, suddenly there are 3 million Jews in the Polish Empire. When you look at the number of Jews who were kicked out of Western Europe, those who fled London, who fled the Crusades, which is from 1000 up until 1300, all those 200 years of Crusades, when you look how many Jews were kicked out of the Rhine River Valley and everything else, it's less than 50,000. And suddenly there's 3 million Jews in Poland. Where did they come from? It wasn't the 50,000 from Western Europe. There's no explanation at all. And as you're right, all their DNA seems to be European. They don't seem to be related, have a lot of Middle Eastern DNA. Anyway, so the Hussar theory is, it finds acceptance in the Encyclopedia Judaica. It's written in the Encyclopedia Judaica that people believed it. But other places in Israel, they hate this theory. They hate this theory. The Orthodox will not accept it. Yes, Seth.
There's actually genetic evidence that may not be the case. There's a bottleneck in Jewish DNA that occurred around the year 1200, because they were able to trace back where the DNA bottlenecks. And based on that, if you figure the number of generations that would have occurred from that bottleneck, and then all of us are descended from that time, the number of generations, it can explain the millions of people that existed in the late 1800s without much difficulty. So
what do you mean the bottleneck?
What happens is populations will go through a bottleneck and the genetic diversity in the population decreases. This happens with animals when they're when they're becoming close to extinction. It also happens with people during famines. And this was around the time of the Black Death.
And the Crusades and the Black Death.
In Germany. So it's quite likely that our ancestors actually were a mixture of Jews coming from the Middle East and local women in Germany that married. But every one of us that has Ashkenazi DNA can probably trace our ancestry back to that population.
It's an interesting theory. It's not, no matter what the reality is biologically, we have to deal with, we have to deal with, when people ask me, so what do you do with the Torah? What I say is the Torah is our story.
Right.
This is our story. The question is, so how do we deal with our story? What did God talk to Moses? I don't know if God talked to Moses. There's no tape recording. I don't know what happened. All I know is that my story is that God spoke to Moses. And this is what God said to Moses. And that's what I've been telling my descendants. We've had the Torah. We can document the Torah as a Torah to the year 450 BCE. 450 BCE, Rosh Hashanah in Jerusalem. It says in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 8, that Ezra the scribe, who was a Babylonian, employed by the Babylonian government. At that point, it was the Persian government, Persia and Babylonia, the same place. And they sent him to Jerusalem. He was the head scribe, the head rabbi, the head religious leader. Nehemiah was the political leader. He was a Persian Jew. Ezra was the religious leader. And he had Nehemiah gather all the Jews on the morning of Rosh Hashanah in 450 BCE. They used a different year. And he read the Torah. He read it in Hebrew. Standing next to him was a guy translating it into Aramaic, which was the Persian language. And it took him like 3.5 hours. And he read the Torah. And ever since then, we've been reading Torahs. So I can't promise you what happened before that. But I can tell you that from the year 450 BCE till today, I'm relatively convinced we have the same Torah. And we Jews, that's what made us Jewish, dealing with the Torah.
That is a perfect note for us to end on. This was a fabulous conversation. I learned a lot tonight. So I want to thank our Rabbi Emeritus, Eric Wisnia, for joining us. And we'll see him again, same bat channel, same bat time next Thursday night.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.